Przewodniczący!
So. Where's Joe Line? Joe, fine, you're here. Fantastic. Good morning, colleagues. It was our colleague, Edward McMillan-Scott, he wanted to start our meeting, but he is just because of very heavy traffic today in Brussels going together with Paul McCartney to visit us. So in 5–10 minutes, our colleague, Edward McMillan-Scott will be with us, but we should start as he asked us without him. It was his idea to invite Mr. Paul McCartney and also Mr. PACHAURI, who is with us just now, and to start with this hearing on climate change and food security. Very interesting topic. We know next week the world is in Copenhagen, whole world. So, our meeting, very important, is just in time. What is necessary in Copenhagen, colleagues? To negotiate global, worldwide and binding agreement. We should not to diminish our expectancies. We should achieve that. And we know that time is against us, so we must be very strong. Europe has taken the lead. We have presented the most far-reaching bid on the table. The climate and energy legislative package, including measures on emission trading, carbon dioxide storage, CO2 reduction from cars, from planes, and effort sharing, just recently been adopted by Parliament, Council and proposed by Commission before that, is a significant contribution and a clear signal to the rest of the world that the European Union is taking its responsibility seriously. Last week, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on the climate conference, as you remember, with absolute majority of votes. We want to say developed countries collectively should reduce 25 to 40% of emission by 2020, and developing countries emission growth to 15 to 30% below so-called business as usual. It is clear for the developing country what does it mean. And the European Union is showing its solidarity with the developing world. The collective contribution of the EU towards developing countries, mitigation and adaptation, both of them are important in developing countries, should not be less than 30 billion euros per year by 2020. 5 to 7 billion euros per year as something like starting funding in those countries, and then much higher amount for every 1 year. It is a matter of trust, matter of our credibility as well with the developing world. The EU has already started doing its homework. We must remember about that. EU will meet the current Kyoto target from 1997 by a large margin, even to 9%. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for the international community to take its responsibilities and work with us to find a common solution. We know that United States administration, by our opinion, cannot continue to hide behind Congress. It's very good that President Obama's personal commitment both to domestic action and to a successful outcome in Copenhagen, is so visible for us. And I would like to underline that China has shown its engagement by proposing to reduce energy intensity by 20% in its current 5-year plan. And Brazil, India, South Africa, the so-called basic group in climate change convention, are preparing an alternative text to the one prepared by the Danish government. This is good news, since the basic text has the support of the G77. G77 shows a commitment to have a serious discussion. Well, colleagues, let me mention another important point very shortly. The need for a real European energy policy. For some in the EU, energy policy is the fight against climate change. Is good, fine, okay. But for others, it is about energy security, because they don't feel secure. But our energy policy is both. Without energy security and a comprehensive energy policy, we cannot address climate change. It is time for us to consider creating a European energy community. We need a new sense of solidarity in production, purchase and consumption of energy. We need new financial instruments to build an energy infrastructure for the 21st century and for the new energy sources, for low-emission fossil fuel using, and so on and so on. No member state can afford not to do it, but no state can afford to do it alone. This can only be done by sustained European investments over the long term. Let us remember that in our Lisbon Treaty was something very important, solidarity from the point of view of energy supply and energy policy. Solidarity means our community for building Europe safe, secure and also low emitted. Dear friends, I believe that Europe will be a positive actor in the global war on climate change, and we will, as Al Gore once said, make peace with the planet. But what can we do as individuals? I am convinced that for us to combat climate change, we will also have to change our habits. From the houses we live in, to the cars we drive, to factories we build, and to the everyday household items we use. Simple things such as better energy efficiency, better insulation, cleaner fuel are needed, otherwise no binding targets will ever be realistic. One of the habits we also have to change is the way we eat. Not everybody wishes to be a vegetarian. My daughter is vegetarian over the last 10 years. I am not, I'm sorry. But everybody can give up meat for one day, at least one day a week. It's a good idea promoted by Paul McCARTNEY. He will be with us in a few minutes. Less meat, less eat. Maybe we do not have every day such a day like today in the European Parliament, but I would like to say that today we have more than half the dishes without any meat in our Parliament. I don't know if it is good news for everybody, but I'm just informing you about that. The Meat-Free Monday campaign is an initiative which allows people to make a meaningful change. The impact on the climate of overproduction of meat is becoming clear. We have to act globally to face global challenges, but we cannot ignore what we do at home, what we do locally, our habits. And it was a famous song by Beatles. Paraphrasing a famous song, it was "Here Comes the Sun," the title. Let's hope we can still say this in the years to come. I feel the ice is slowly melting. We need to keep long, cold winters. Here comes the sun, and we must make sure it's all right. All the best to our planet. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much indeed, President.
Okay, well,
my name is...
Well, so many thanks to you. Well, it was McMillan-Scott. He was proposed for, and our Bureau accepted, our colleagues, Vice Presidents. So your idea, very good idea, to bring to us, to the European Parliament, Paul McCarTNEY, Mr. PACHAURI, which is responsible for climate issue in the United Nations. Very good idea. We are just, every one of us, sitting and waiting, and we are very glad you are with us. Yes, please.
Thank you, President. I'm sorry to be late for my own hearing, and a very warm welcome to everybody here. What I intended to say at the beginning, I was delayed coming from the airport with Sir Paul, is that next week the Copenhagen summit opens, and our subject for today's hearing has not generally been raised. That according to the Food and Agricultural Organization's 2006 report, Livestock's Long Shadow, worldwide livestock production generates more greenhouse gases at 18% than transport, 13%. And last week, a report sponsored by Britain's Department of Health confirmed the health benefits of eating less meat, which I have myself experienced since I have not eaten meat since last Christmas lunch. This subject has many aspects: agriculture, development, the environment, and we shall hear from our parliamentary colleagues this morning. We shall also hear from the chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as the President has said, Dr. Rajendra K, and the UN's rapporteur on the right to food, Mr. de Schutter, as well as, of course, Sir Paul McCarTNEY, founder of Meat Free Monday. Mr. President, China's rapid growth is producing more heat and demanding more meat. And on the eve of International Human Rights Day on December the 10th, and as Vice President responsible for democracy and human rights, I think too of the 5 to 7 million people in prison camps across China who get no meat at all. In a globalizing world, governments next week will start to decide for us. But in one respect, we can decide for ourselves now how to slow climate change. Less meat equals less heat. Thank you.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you very much, Edward McMillan-Scott. Thank you very much, our President Jerzy Buzek, for the fantastic speech introducing our hearing this morning. My name is Joe Leinen. I'm the chairman of the Environment Committee in this House, in the European Parliament, and I'm now chairing the panel debates. Before later, then we have a coffee break and get the speeches of Sir Paul McCarTNEY and Rajendra K. The European Parliament has been the driving force in climate protection, and we have made a big contribution in the last years to the climate package that the European Union has decided at the end of last year. And we go with an official delegation to Copenhagen, 15 people, members from different political groups, but we will be much more. The interest of people's representatives in Europe is such high that we will be more than 70 people, 70 members of this parliament in Copenhagen, and we know that from the American Congress some 60 members from Senate and the House of Representatives will come, and I think we have a big role to play. In Copenhagen, even the parliaments are not the negotiators are the governments. So our first role is to be the watchdog for the negotiators from Commission and Council, that they stick to our proposals and our commitments and our promises. and then to be a pressure group, to create the really positive climate, to have a dynamic during the next 2 weeks, that the governments do more than they have promised at home. And we have seen in Bali or in Rio de Janeiro that the civil society with the people's representatives of the parliaments are always playing a very important role in these United Nations conferences. We at the Parliament have done this resolution that the President mentioned, which is very comprehensive. We have our emissions trading system. We have our targets for reduction of CO2, but it is more than industry that has to commit itself, and it is transport in all its aspects, not only the road transport, the vehicles, but as well aviation and the maritime transport, which give an increasing amount of greenhouse gases. And it is the forests and the land use. And there we are coming immediately to our topic, to the way of consuming food and the way of growing food and growing food for a growing world population. I'm happy to announce our speakers. The first one is Dr. Alain Dancourt, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Then Mairead McGuinness, the rapporteur on the Common Agricultural Policy and Global Food Security in the Agricultural Committee, and then Kriton Arsenis, member of my committee, the Environment Committee, here in the Parliament. We are a democracy, we are a plural society in Europe, and we have, of course, all sorts of opinions. Those who strongly believe that climate change is already happening and that we have not to lose any time to fight it, but we have as well climate change deniers, so to deny that this is the case, and of course they will raise their voice and deny that anything with meat production will have to do with climate change or climate protection. But we are an open house, an open society, and everybody expresses him or herself as she or he wants. So I pass on to Dr. Alain Dancourt. Please give us your introduction to our debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak today. I'm honoured to be here. We need food to survive, but how much food do we need, and what sort of food? What should our overall diet look like? Up until now, this has predominantly been a question for people like me. I'm a public health nutritionist, but also for government, food and nutrition policymakers who provide guidelines for consumers on what foods are needed to promote health. The very evident links between diet and disease suggest that public health must remain the primary consideration in the definition of national and international dietary guidelines. But it is now clear that debate and research on healthy diets needs considerably wider involvement. For far too long, there has been separation of academic disciplines and government departments, which has resulted in research silos and non-joined-up government. The impending crisis of climate change is forcing all this to change, and identifying strategies to ensure that populations have access to both a healthy and a sustainable diet must now take centre stage. The agriculture sector contributes between 10 and 12% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. Significant additional emissions arise from agriculture-related changes in land use, such as deforestation. And emissions from the sector are set to increase by half again, so that's as much as 50% more greenhouse gas emissions from the sector by 2030. But there's not much we can do about this, is there? We need food, don't we? And the agriculture sector, that is farmers, provides our food. Well, the underpinning questions must now be asked again. How much food do we need? And what sorts of food should we be producing and eating if we are serious about preventing climate change? These are important questions that link agriculture, food, and health with climate change. At the start of this year, an international group of scientists, coordinated by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, set out to try to answer some of these questions. We identified potential strategies that could meet the recommended cuts in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 in the food and agriculture sector, and then, for the first time, we also quantified the effects that these strategies would potentially have on population health. This was a thought experiment to try to identify if there would be any so-called co-benefits to health of policies that were primarily designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Our work, for those of you that are interested, was very recently published in the highly respected medical journal, The Lancet. We started by making an assumption that reductions in greenhouse gas emissions in the agriculture sector would need to be of the same magnitude as in other sectors, such as transport. We started with the assumption that we don't have the luxury of making choices about where we make cuts. We need to make cuts in all sectors. And we based our estimates on emissions data and dietary intake data from the United Kingdom. I'm sure you're all aware that the Food and Agriculture Organization has estimated that the production of livestock accounts for 4/5 of total greenhouse gas emissions in the agriculture sector. So the production of livestock naturally became the primary focus of our work. While efficiencies may be possible in all parts of agricultural production, and for example from actions to reduce waste, strategies directly impacting on the scale of livestock production are likely to be the most direct way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the sector. But don't we need to eat livestock products such as meat and milk for our health? Well, certainly, current evidence suggests that some meat consumption is probably needed to enable children under the age of 5 years to reach their dietary needs for certain vitamins and minerals. But it is also abundantly clear that excess consumption of livestock products is associated with poor health outcomes, especially in adults. For example, animal products are a major contributor of saturated fat in the human diet, and high intake of saturated fat is consistently associated with increased risk of heart disease. Similarly, there is very strong evidence that high red and processed meat consumption is associated with increased risks of certain types of cancer. So the answer to the question of whether we need to eat livestock products is complicated. Probably yes, at certain times in life, but as with all things, moderation in intake is important. So back to our work. The agricultural sector has for many years been working to improve efficiencies and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and some important advances have been made. However, the latest estimates suggest that these existing strategies, such as manure management and carbon capture through management of land use, will fall well short of UK government emission targets. And we estimated that in addition to the existing strategies, it would be necessary to cut overall livestock production in the United Kingdom by 30% to meet the greenhouse gas emission targets for the livestock sector in the United Kingdom. But our primary interest was not just to identify possible strategies to meet greenhouse gas targets in the sector, but rather to estimate the effects this strategy might also have on population health. We therefore assumed that a 30% cut in livestock production would result in a similar fall in the consumption of livestock products, and especially of animal source saturated fat. We used existing data on the association of the consumption of saturated fat with the risk of heart disease in adults. Ischemic heart disease is the most common cause of death in high-income countries, and indeed globally is the cause of 7 million deaths per year. We estimated that a 30% cut in the consumption of animal source saturated fat would result in a substantial decrease in the order of about 17% in the number of premature deaths from heart disease among adults in the United Kingdom. That's equivalent to 18,000 premature deaths averted in 1 year, or about 3% of all deaths in the United Kingdom. So to summarize, we identified a strategy to meet greenhouse gas emission targets for the agriculture sector in the United Kingdom, which was namely to cut the production of livestock, and we estimated that if implementation of this strategy also led to a fall in the consumption of animal source saturated fat, it would have a substantial benefit to population health. This is a great news story, a policy that is good for the environment and good for public health, a rare win-win scenario in this area. What's more, we only looked at one diet and health association. There may also be additional benefits to health associated with decreased consumption of livestock products, such as reduced incidence of certain types of cancer. Clearly, we acknowledge that there are uncertainties in some of our estimates, and they should only be seen as indicative of the sorts of health benefits that might accrue from sensible strategies that primarily set out to tackle greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, there are caveats. Our estimates are based only on UK data. Some sorts of livestock rearing, such as small-scale upland sheep and cattle farming, have inherently lower greenhouse gas emissions than intensive animal husbandry practices. And our estimates only relate to countries which consume large quantities of animal source foods, and for millions of poor people in low-income countries, animals are a crucial source of livelihoods. It is important also to remember that the proposal is to reduce livestock production in countries that consume large amounts of livestock products. We do not propose total elimination of animal source food consumption. But how realistic is this? How possible is it to shift population consumption patterns? In the United Kingdom, adult males are estimated to eat over 1 kilogram of meat and meat products a week. Is it necessary to eat that much? It's clearly not necessary for health, and indeed, I've suggested consumption of large amounts of livestock products is associated with very poor health outcomes. And this level of meat consumption is much more than national dietary recommendations, and it has been recently estimated that sticking to national dietary recommendations may reduce healthcare costs by as much as £20 billion a year in the UK. Another advantage. Several nations have already taken up the challenge of reducing consumption of animal source foods in their populations for the good of the environment. Here in Belgium, civil servants in Ghent are committed to going meat-free 1 day a week. In Sweden, dietary guidelines explicitly recommend that meat consumption should be reduced because of the associated greenhouse gas emissions, and Swedish food products are all now state their carbon footprint. These are brave and crucially important first steps towards tackling the impending climate crisis. A greater awareness of the climate costs of all of our actions, including our choice about what we eat, is urgently needed. Governments and consumers face tough choices. But surely, cooling our love affair with animal source foods is a very small price to pay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Dancour, for this very bright introduction in our hearing. Sir Paul McCARTNEY is campaigning for Meat-Free Monday. I'm Catholic, and I remember my education was to have a meat-free Friday. The Catholics since ever, and I think since thousands of years, people knew that 1 day a week without meat would be something good, healthy. So there is something in it that is a collective wisdom of people since ever. Yeah, we come now to our other panelists, and they are asked to speak not more than 4 minutes, which is a good, large speaking time in this parliament. And I ask Mairead McGuinness from the Agricultural Committee to contribute to our issue, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the warning of the 4 minutes, so do watch me carefully. I suppose I might as well admit I'm a Catholic as well, so perhaps religion is what this is about ultimately. But can I say that we were told to eat fish on Friday to save our souls. Now we're being told to give up meat on a Monday to save the planet, and with respect to that argument, neither works. And frankly, can I say that it would only be a vegetarian who would suggest that we have a meat-free Monday, because in our house we have a roast on Sunday and we never waste anything, so we always have the leftovers on a Monday. That's the joke. Look, this is a very serious debate and I welcome that we're having it. I'm also a member of the Environment Committee of this Parliament and Agriculture, as the Chairman has mentioned. I would have liked that all of those who speak here today would respect this chamber and listen to each other. We are speaking in separate streams almost, but perhaps our messages will find some resonance with one another and that we will learn from each other. I was tempted to say we might even be singing off the same hymn sheet. Can I say that I believe that agriculture and livestock are part of the problem, but they're not the problem with climate change. And they are definitely, agriculture and livestock, are part of the solution, but not the only solution. And if we look at European agriculture, it has made huge efforts with success to reduce emissions. Once farmers and those who manage the land, and while we talk about all of this, there are people managing the livestock and the land, and I wish that more of them were here to hear this debate, and perhaps were on the panel to give their perspective. But we have reduced emissions from European agriculture. We know ways of doing it, and the research is pointing us in a direction of further improvements. Farmers would welcome that particular knowledge. And while the last speaker, and put some very interesting facts before us, which I will take on board, said that he is not advocating that we take meat away from the diet completely, and I welcome that statement. There are many in this House, and one of the key speakers, in fact two of the key speakers, rather three, are suggesting that we take meat from the diet, and I disagree with that proposition. I disagree with it from several perspectives, and I'm not a dietitian, but I am a mother and therefore I usually look after the household diet. I believe in moderation. It's a boring word, but it works. Unlike Edward McMillan-Scott, I will be enjoying meat for turkey, and I'm blessed that I can afford to have the luxury of a good meal. But I also eat porridge in the morning, and perhaps maybe he does eat porridge, but he should take to it. But I'm not going to shove porridge down everyone's throat as a solution to a health problem, which we clearly have. I do believe that moderation is the key. Let me deal specifically with agriculture on a global level, because yes, emissions from agriculture globally are increasing, while in the European Union they're decreasing. Livestock is really important in the developing world, and I'm a bit concerned that the message from this chamber will do harm to the developing world and the inclusion that they have of livestock in not only part of the diet but also in traction work in fields and on farms. The nutrition from meat products, particularly milk, is particularly important in the developing world. And yes, the developing world and emerging economies aspire to the diets we have. We don't want them to be excessive consumers of anything, and we do not want them to follow our bad habits. But please do not suggest that if the world goes vegetarian, we will have a much greater or lesser rather problem of climate change. I walked into this chamber this morning and I'm quite sure that many of you felt the heat in the chamber, and that was before the discussion. And really there are so many ways in which we preach about what must be done by others and fail to act ourselves. I requested that the heat be turned down, and I was told it's the system and it cannot change so quickly. And can I say to you that in agriculture, it has changed hugely in my time of reporting and dealing with this sector. Am I okay, Chair? He's not giving out yet, just slightly. It has changed and it will continue to change. But my passionate belief is we will and we need to have livestock production in the European Union and globally. We need to do it better, and we are doing it better. And those who manage the land, we need not to alienate them with this debate. Livestock producers will feel alienated and angered by the message from this debate. We need to include them in it so that we all make progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mairead McGuinness from the Agriculture Committee. Of course, agriculture is not the problem, but only part of the problem, and the willingness is there to be part of the solution. You eat the Sunday roast on Sunday and the rest on the Monday. Now I ask what the people do in Greece. Kriton Arsenis from the Environment Committee is the next speaker, please.
And also from the Development Committee for this panel. We really do not know enough about this anthropogenic climate change. And coming here to the Parliament, I've been studying to see how I can contribute most to solving these global environmental threats. And I really understand that we don't know how this planet really works, and we have to understand its factor in order to solve this problem. We do know, though, that we had faced a similar threat in humanity. It was the Cold War and the nuclear threat. Then it was, the threat was that either Reagan or Gorbachev or someone else would push the button to ignite the first nuclear missile. Now the threat is that for the button, everybody, each one of us pushes every day to turn on the lights, to start the engine of the car, or to start the engine in the factory or in the power plant. We don't know, though, the complexity of interconnections in nature, or otherwise we don't know how many more of our activities are adding up to speeding up the climate change. And this discussion for me is important because it adds up one more factor to this discussion, one more thing that we have to be aware of. FAO has officially calculated livestock-related emissions at 18% of total emissions. Other studies in 2009 by Goodland and Anhart from the World Watch Institute raises that to 51%, as it proves that FAO missed out important data. It might be an exaggeration, but still we know that livestock production is contributing a lot to climate change. And of course, we include the energy consumption related is included in these calculations. So we are consuming these livestock products. And although, as Mrs. McGuinness said, pastry or agriculture in general in Europe is decreasing, livestock production, livestock consumption or livestock products consumption in Europe is sharply increasing. So either we consume our livestock products or the developing countries' livestock products, we are consuming more and more each year. So it's we, the Europeans, thank you. It's we, the Europeans, that are paying for forests to be cut down, to be turned into farmland, for agriculture to be used sometimes for agricultural production that is going to be consumed by animals, for animal production that we are going to consume finally. So it's everybody, this issue is everybody's responsibility. And for me, as far as I can see, coming from the Mediterranean, a solution is our local diets. Our local diets do not have, in any case, do not include in any case eating meat every day. This is a love relationship we have developed with meat, but it's a very recent one, and it's part of our commercial culture. And so my proposal for a sustainable food policy and health policy should be to turn again local, to turn again to our local diets, our local costumes, that in most cases at least are far better and are more integrated with each place's capacity to produce without damaging the environment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kriton. Mediterranean diet is world famous and should be healthy, as you could read and even see from the records what diseases are not there if you use this Mediterranean diet. Yeah, we have now some 50 minutes of debates in the plenary. Hier im Parlament haben wir alle Sprachen. Also
here in the European Parliament we have all the languages, we have interpretation.
I would say that we have the catch-the-eye procedure. The MEPs know it, and you should raise your hand and help me to go through these 50 minutes. I would propose 1.5 minutes. It's not much, but concentrate on one idea or two ideas and make comments or ask questions to our panelists. Who wants to take the floor? I see that our members are quite keen, or please, then you are the first one. Please, 1.5 minutes. I look on the watch. And you might present yourself. Just say where you are, where you come from, and then please. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Pádraig Walsh is the name. I'm President of COPA, the European Farmers Organisation, and thank you very much for allowing me to contribute to this debate. There's a number of things, I think, a number of points that need to be made. Firstly, with regard to the calculations of greenhouse gas emissions, no allowance whatsoever is made for the fact that most livestock production in the world is on grassland-based terrain. And that grassland is a carbon sink. The fact that it is a carbon sink is not credited against livestock production or against meat production in bovine or sheep. And if it were, as it should be, it would reduce the greenhouse gas emissions or the allowance against livestock production by somewhere around 30 to 50%, depending on the production system. And also, in the UK, the speaker said he was using data from the UK. It totally disregards the fact that 60% of the area in the UK is only fit for grassland production and cannot be used for arable production. If we were to switch to a vegetarian diet, as some people might suggest, we would not be able to feed the world. This 60%, and it's even higher in a country like Ireland, where I come from, where roughly 80% of the area would not be fit for arable production, only suitable for grassland, so therefore only suitable for livestock or sheep production or dairy production, not fit for arable production. And also, he doesn't take any regard whatsoever that if we switch from a meat diet to a vegetarian diet, it means that we're ploughing the land every year or cultivating the land every year, thus releasing carbon. Whereas when we have permanent pasture, like we have in the situation that we have in livestock production areas, we have a huge carbon sink in terms of grassland storing carbon. Also, there is no regard whatsoever for the fact...
Thank you very much. Thank you. A very important contribution. Thank you. Then please take you the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Pierre Chevalier, Chairman of the National Bovine Federation in France and Chair of the Copenhagen group. Thank you for organising this debate on climate change and food policy on the eve of Copenhagen. The quality of the speakers was extremely high, and I think today, here in the European Parliament, we have to strike a difference between Europe and the other major continents that produce beef. In Europe, we produce beef over areas where cows are fed for 80% on grasslands, and these grasslands in Europe do act as a carbon sink. They are true carbon sinks. If you draw a comparison across the world of food consumption of beef, in France we have 2 steaks a week, and that's a lot of days, 5 days a week, which are meat-free. And if you look at the average beef consumption in Europe, that's 15 kilos a year in Europe, 60 in South America, 50 in the United States. So I think the whole point of this morning's debate is to analyse food policy and climate change and to apply them to Europe rather than to mix it up with what's happening across the world. We have extensive breeding in Europe and we manage our land very carefully across Europe. And we have grasslands in Ireland, in the Massif Central. We have arable and dairy production in other areas. And these are vital when it comes to managing our land properly and supporting society. I think, therefore, we shouldn't mix up chalk and cheese. We shouldn't mix up what happens in Europe with what happens in the rest of the world. Thank you.
The next one is Vittorio Brodo.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. It's extremely interesting to debate these things, and there's no doubt that we have to strike the right balance here. In the land, we have twice the amounts of carbon that are present in the atmosphere. So it's very important as well that we maintain the grasslands that exist. The problem arises when breeding livestock is based on arable products, corn, for example, maize, and the fact that you need 8 kilograms of corn to produce 1 kilogram of meat. And at that point, I think it's justified to ask just how much is necessary to get the same proteins from milk. And I think we have to work together to strike an optimal balance for ensuring that arable production and also food products are properly managed. Thank you.
Grazie. Caroline Lucas, member from GB.
Thank you very much. Yes, from the Greens in the UK. I very much welcome today's debate. Many of us have been trying to get this issue of livestock emissions onto the agenda for many years, so it's very gratifying now to see that it's being taken seriously. I have one question and one comment, really. The question was to the first speaker, who I think was from the London School of Hygiene, who said that children under 5 needed some meat in order to get a fully balanced diet. And I just wanted to ask what the science was behind that, because my understanding was that it might be a little bit more difficult to get a more balanced diet without using meat, but it was perfectly possible to, even if you have a child under 5. So one was a question about the science behind that. But the other was just to also pick up actually a phrase that you used. You talked about a win-win situation in the sense that reducing our meat consumption is good for the climate and it's good for our health. I would just like to make it, if I could, a win-win-win-win situation, because not only is it good for the climate, good for our health, I would argue it's also good for animal welfare. We've heard very little about that today, but we know that more and more intensive livestock production is likely to be less good in terms of the welfare impact on the animals, and so I'd like to just put that on the table as well, just to look at these win-wins. And finally, to make the point, of course, that the previous speaker was just talking about the conversion rates of grain put in to meat that comes out. And if we're talking about being able to feed a rising population over the coming decades, then it's clear that it's not going to be possible to feed a rising population on the kind of diet that we have in the West. We're going to have a much less meat-based diet because it's simply an incredibly inefficient way of using grain resources in a constrained world.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please.
Oui, bonjour, je suis parlementaire belge.
Hello, I'm a Belgian member of Parliament, a Green. I think it's important to think about the common agricultural policy in the context of this debate, because in our rural areas we need to have a balance between livestock farming and arable farming. Livestock need to be able to feed on grass, and they also produce fertilizer for arable land. I believe that animal nutrition is extremely important. So what we need to think about is, are we going to have a common agricultural policy which is going to support extensive grass-based livestock farming rather than intensive livestock farming, or, for instance, the import of plant proteins? So, you know, there's farming and farming. And I think if you've got farming which is based on the land in every respect, then that's what we want for Europe.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, Madame.
Thank you. Anne Fitzpatrick from the European Council of Young Farmers. I'd like to put just 2 points. One was to the speaker from the London School of Hygiene. I'd perhaps like you to elaborate a bit further on the saturated fat content that you refer to in your discussions about the consumption of livestock products. I don't think there's anybody in this room that would disagree with you if we were to say that, that eating hamburgers 7 days a week is bad for your health. But also I would submit that sometimes it's the treatment of these products and it's in the production rather than in the actual product that comes from the farm that we have the problems. And also I would actually like to address the panel on perhaps any information you have on how changing livestock nutrition can actually impact on reducing methane gases at farm gate level. Thank you.
Yeah. You, please. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Sebastian Zösch. I'm from the European Vegetarian Union. I would just like to, well, there was a statement that, you know, that you should eat meat in some time of your life, and I would just like to make an additional contribution. There's the American Dietetic Association, which is the world's largest association of nutrition and dietitians, and they have a position paper on vegetarianism each year. And there they state that even a well-balanced vegan diet, and especially a vegetarian diet in all bases of your life, is suitable, including pregnancy, childhood, or anything else. So I would just like to add that even if you skip out animal products from your diet at all, you can live a very healthy life. Thank you.
No.
Hello, my name is Koen Boekhart. I'm representing the European Soy Manufacturers Association. And I just want to pick in on one perspective that maybe has been left out at this moment in time, is from a consumer perspective, what can consumers do in order to move from this more animal-based regime and diet into a more vegetable-based diet? Well, we as soy manufacturers here in Europe, we provide practical solutions, be it in terms of alternatives of milk, be it in terms of alternatives for milk in order to come to these products. They're good in taste, they're good for the health, they're low in saturated fats, they're low in cholesterol, and they clearly address the topic, in fact, that Dr. represented in his first presentation. There is a practical solution to that. At the same time, what we see is that the kind of products that we have do have a lower CO2 impact. If we compare milk, there is a factor of 5 lower CO2 impact compared to dairy alternatives. If we look to meat, especially beef, there is a factor of about 10. So we do have healthy products that indeed also do have a lower impact. Furthermore, there is a lower impact on land usage, there's a lower impact on water usage. So if the question is, do we find practical solutions in terms of food to bring that to the consumer, the answer is yes, they are. They're already in the shelves. And so the invitation is that whenever you think about policy, also include, in fact, some of the elements in terms of legislation that will help the association to bring these kind of products in a kind of equivalent, non-discriminated way to the consumer, be it in terms of health claims, be it in terms of nutrition claims, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oui, Ambroise Perrin, je suis conseiller au groupe.
I'm an advisor in the Socialists and Democrats group.
All we need is food, but good food. Could we imagine how will be a meal in 2030 when I will be 74? would it be only pills?
Okay, the meal in the year 2030. Maybe Paul McCartney is making a song about it. You should ask him later, yeah. Please.
Oh, okay, well, as usual, at the risk of being the pantomime baddie, look, this is happy hour on the funny farm, isn't it? I mean, the fact of the matter is you've got global warming written there in front of you. You know, why was the globe actually warmer 1,000 years ago during the medieval warm period in comparison to what it is now? Why was it warmer 2,000 years ago during the Roman warm period when we were producing wine as far north as Scotland? I mean, come on, the globe hasn't warmed for the past 10 years. It's a scientific fact. It's out there. So look, you know, the European Union is using climate change, it's using global warming to justify its own existence. And poor old Paul McCartney has been duped, I'm afraid. You know, and just to take one thing up with you, Mr. Chairman, at the start, you said that people who are climate change sceptics are deniers. Now, I'm sorry, being German and all, I'm sure you know the connotations that the term denier has, and I think you should call us sceptics, actually, because we are. And also Mr. McMillan-Scott, who said he'd been to the airport to pick up Sir Paul. I mean, it's a bit of a con, isn't it? You know, it's do as I say and not as I do. You know, so, look, as a bit of a protest, we in the UK Independence Party are holding a barbecue out on Plas Lux. You're all invited. It's called All You Need Is Meat, and we'll be celebrating meat at 12 o'clock today.
Enjoy your food, and I hope it has no consequences for you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Madam.
Joyce De Silva from Compassion in World Farming. I'd just like to say that statistics show from the FAO that we're going to probably double the number of livestock in the world by 2050. And that is going to be really, really untenable, because at the moment we are feeding so much of what we grow. Over a third of all the cereals in the world go into animal feed, and 94% of the soya that's grown in the world goes into animal feed. We're now taking more cereals out to make biofuels, so there is less food to go directly to people. And so over 1 billion people in the world go to bed hungry every night, while we feed our chickens, our pigs, our cattle, so that we can have meat and milk and eggs, and they can have nothing. Or we drive our cars and feel good about our biofuel cars, and they have nothing. And I'd like to really support Caroline Lucas in what she said about animal welfare, because, in fact, the gentleman in front of me is wrong. 2/3 of the animals that we farm for food are actually farmed in industrial factory farms, where their welfare is not a priority, and where they live in miserable conditions and cannot fulfill any of their natural behaviours and have a really poor quality of life. So I think you can have a win-win situation: less meat, meat reared humanely on grassland, you get the carbon sink effect, and you avoid the industrial animal products, and we can have healthier lives, the animals can have happier lives, and the planet has a chance. Thank you.
The next speaker is walking behind the ones who make the barbecue, so I can't give him the floor. You want to have your steak, Chris Davis, or how is it? Chris, you want to intervene? Because you're the last one before I give the floor again to the panelists and we go to the coffee break. You see how seducing your barbecue on Place Luxembourg is. He forgot his speech and wants to join you. But now his intervention is certainly not in this way. Please.
Well, thank you, and thank you to my colleague from my same region, Paul Nuttall, for staying so that I can insult him. First of all, can I just say that some of this debate is artificial? You know, there's a sort of a, you know, you're either a vegetarian or you're a carnivore. Come on. You know, we recognise that most of us are omnivores. There are good health reasons why we should curb our growing consumption of meat across the world, and there are good environmental reasons too. But a balance in all things. But I just want to, first of all, apologise for the education system in the northwest of England, that it can produce someone that believes that because we had one particularly warm year in 1998, there was no evidence of global warming, and I'm sorry that no one has ever been able to teach the law of averages. I also finally just want to apologise for the fact that the cities that I represent and Paul Nuttall represents, Manchester and Liverpool, have in many cases huge differences from one district to another in the life expectation of our people. And part of that is a matter of diet and the fact that all too many people, especially in impoverished circumstances, are living on diets where fat is makes a particular contribution to their diet and leads to heart disease and shorter life expectancy. I think this is a matter that is serious. I think diet needs to be addressed. I think poorer people in Liverpool and Manchester have as much right to long life expectancy as middle-class people, and I'm sorry that UKIP thinks that's just a big joke.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that there have been very interesting contributions, and the panelists might intervene for 2-3 minutes, and I start in the other way around. Kriton, you want to comment, or are you satisfied what you heard? Please.
No, I would like just to add that the issue of how animals are raised, it is an important issue, and it's an important issue of our culture. And we do have to change a lot in our culture, because many things that are in our culture right now is what creates climate change and a lot of our environmental threats. So sorry for not adding that to my speech. It is important.
Thank you. Margaret McGuinness, some interventions on the way we produce food, agriculture, that's your business.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be as brief, so I'm warning you rather than begging your indulgence. I think the interventions show how much everyone has opinions about this issue. And, you know, Chris Evans, who is, and declared last week he doesn't eat meat, I thought you made a very fair intervention. I agree with your points of view about poor people having poor diets. I believe that climate change and the dietary issue is a very upper middle class debate. I wish it wasn't. I wish it was coming from those people whose health are affected. But because there is such division and single agendas in this audience, I fear that we will not make progress. Yes, I come from agriculture. On the animal welfare question, the European Union has the most strict animal welfare guidelines in all of its production systems. It does nothing to defend those at the world trade level whatsoever, and in Geneva, even as I speak, they're forging ahead with the free market. The truth for all of us who have money is that we do not pay enough for food. We do not reward farmers for these, as they now call them, these values, these public services, the public goods dimension. And unless and until we do that, we are pushing our farmers for the relentless production of more to earn less. As I said earlier, and I'm angry about this, we're in the cosy comforts of the European Parliament. We're entertaining a man who doesn't eat meat, who can afford to eat all of us if he so chooses, and could probably buy us. And he brings a very important message. But the message, when he leaves here, will be for us as politicians, elected politicians, to deliver on. I believe in moderation. I believe in all of the things that have been said here, in particular the grassland issue. And lastly, there was one very young lady, who, I think Ms Fitzpatrick, who asked about the research. Yes, there is lots of research, both within Europe and in Australia, on diets for ruminants. So we can reduce emissions. The debate is too polarised. Vegetarianism, veganism, meat eaters. I'm a boring moderate and I'm healthy, but I want also to save the planet. The debate in the UK, I was going to say let them eat cake.
Thank you. And then Dr. Dangur for 2-3 minutes. Your comments, please.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted that the debate has stimulated so much discussion and thought. And indeed, everyone does have a view on this topic, because everyone has a view on food, because we eat every day and we care about, a lot of us care about what we eat. The point is we need to think more about what we eat, and we need to think more about the environmental consequences of what we eat. I'd like to pick up on a few points that have been raised and respond to those. The first is about this very important issue about grassland-fed livestock. This is, of course, a very important question, but the most important question is, what is the scale of grassland farming that is possible and sustainable? Excess grassland farming leads to decreased ability of the soil to sequester carbon. So if you overgraze your grass, you decrease the ability of grassland to sequester carbon. Indeed, grassland is important carbon sink, but we need to be careful about how much we use it. The second point I'd like to raise is that much of the discussion has in fact been about large livestock, so that's beef and cattle, beef and sheep. What about chickens and pigs? What do you think they eat? Chickens and pigs eat grain or they eat soya. Where does that come from? What is the environmental consequence of producing those in order to produce pigs and chickens? That's another question we need to have in our minds. We're not just talking about beef and sheep, we're talking about livestock in general. I entirely agree with the very, very important comments from number 34 at the front here about the need to ensure that everyone has the right to a healthy diet. Processed foods can contain large amounts of saturated fat and salt. And it is we're relatively wealthy, we can afford, we're educated to choose healthy foods. Other people don't have that possibility, and that is not right. They have a right to eat a healthy food and to live as healthily as the rest of us. There are, of course, to respond to the Young Farmers Union lady, there are, of course, very important matters to do with breeding and to do with reducing emissions in livestock. It's also clear that we can feed livestock on certain animals, on certain foods, which will enhance their nutrient quality, and that is an important advance. And my final point to the vegetarians who have been slightly cross about my comment, I think it's important to distinguish between meat and milk. I also think it's important to distinguish between developed and developing countries, and I think it's very important to understand that, of course, you can meet your dietary requirements in wealthy countries because there are the possibility of enhancing nutrient density of foods in rich countries, but in poor countries, that is often not possible. The nutrient density of foods in poor countries is often so low that the nutrient needs of growing children are not met. This is, however, a growing area of research, and there is still some uncertainty, but it certainly looks like there may be some requirements in young children. And I end on the plea that this should indeed be taken forward. I would beg the European Parliament to take these matters seriously, to go back to your countries and to take these matters seriously. We don't have the luxury of just saying, oh, it's all right, transport will work it out, they'll make cars which don't have emissions, and that'll be fine. We have to act in every sector in order to meet our greenhouse gas emission targets. I don't want to be the one who said, I didn't try. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this lively debate. We have now a coffee break, and you are invited to come back by past, and then we go to the second half of this morning. Thanks to the panelists and to all those who have contributed. See you in 15 minutes. It's not allowed to bring the coffee in the hemicycle, just to remind you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our hearing on global warming and food policy entitled Less Meat, Less Heat. I hope you had an enjoyable coffee break, inspirational talks, and I welcome you back now to listen to our next distinguished speakers. I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce to you Olivier de Schutter, who is the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food of the United Nations. So I think we're all very much looking forward to what you will report to us on what the UN is doing in this field and what your special role is and the advice that you can give to us. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very grateful to this invitation to contribute to this hearing within the European Parliament on the impact of our consumption choices on global food security and on the right to food. I think the discussion arrives at the best time possible. First, as a result of the global food crisis of 2007-2008, there is a renewed and unprecedented interest in rethinking our agricultural systems. Massive changes, therefore, lie ahead. Foreign direct investment flows in agriculture, for example, have jumped to 3 billion annually in 2006-2007, up from $600 million annually during the 1990s. And this is a welcome development. I think investments in agriculture can have a powerful impact on the reduction of poverty. And one of the reasons why the food system is going through such a crisis today is because since the 1980s, investments in agriculture have been sorely insufficient. But we must ask not only how much money will go into agriculture, but also in support of which types of production, with which impact on revenues, and with which environmental consequences. Secondly, governments are increasingly aware today of the relationship between climate change and food security. As we've seen recently in East Africa, in India, or in the Central American regions affected by the El Niño phenomenon, climate change is already threatening the ability of entire regions to maintain their actual levels of agricultural production. In sub-Saharan Africa, as well as in parts of Asia, climate change will affect rains. It will increase the frequency of droughts and average temperature. Less fresh water will be available for agricultural production. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has estimated that in southern Africa, yields from rain-fed agriculture could be reduced up to 50% between 2000 and 2020 as a result of changes in temperature. Overall, our productive capacity worldwide will decrease at least 3% by the 2080s in comparison to the year 2000, and up to 16% if the anticipated carbon fertilization effects fail to materialize. The losses will be particularly important in Africa and in Latin America. While these findings may sound bleak, they still err in the direction of optimism. They do not include the impact of more frequent extreme weather events, floods and droughts, which are the most immediate manifestation of changing climate patterns. Nor do they take into account the fact that rising sea levels may contaminate coastal freshwater and salinize them. They do not consider, finally, the risk of diminished agricultural production due to the scarcity of water for irrigation, although we know that the melting of the great glaciers of the Himalayas, for example, could increase flooding from river overflows and at the same time affect the water resources of a large number of people in Central and South Asia. More than 1 billion people could be affected by the 2050s, and as a result, the crop yields could decrease by up to 30% in Central and South Asia by 2050. Finally, soil degradation is progressing at a frightening speed. Agriculture is a victim of climate change, but agriculture, of course, is also an obvious culprit, and therefore, in directing investments in agriculture, taking the environmental dimension into account is crucial. Unsustainable forms of agriculture, unsustainable patterns of consumption, are accelerating the trend towards global warming. Modern agriculture, it has been said, accounts for 14% of total man-made greenhouse gas emissions. Land use change, including deforestation to develop agricultural land, contributes another 19%. And while forests have an essential role to play in capturing carbon dioxide, they store about 45% of terrestrial carbon. They are currently being destroyed on a very large scale. One question, however, is almost systematically avoided in international discussions about global food security, and that is the impact of the modes of consumption in rich countries on our ability to feed the planet. Yet, these modes of consumption are in part responsible for the situation we are now facing. The food we eat determines how we produce food. The increase in livestock production in response to our demand for meat results in huge negative externalities that are not accounted for in the price of food. Out of these 14% greenhouse gas emissions coming from agriculture, fertilizers represent 38%, but livestock represents another 31%. And in the 2006 study called Livestock's Long Shadow, the study published by the FAO then, it was noted that in total, taking into account deforestation to create pastures, livestock is responsible for 18% of greenhouse gas emissions, almost double the share of transport. Together, grazing land and cropland, in order to produce feed crops, account for 70% of all agricultural land, or about 30% of the land surface of the planet. Livestock grazing alone is responsible for 26% of the use of ice-free terrestrial surface of the planet, and the rapid expansion of pastures is one of the major reasons for deforestation, particularly in the Amazon region. This, ladies and gentlemen, is not the best use of our scarce natural resources. Earlier this year, the United Nations Environmental Programme published a report called The Environment's Role in Averting Future Food Crisis. It noted that by reducing meat consumption in the rich countries, restraining it worldwide by 2050 at the per capita level of 2000, which is 37.4 kilograms per capita per year, we would free an estimated 400 million tons of cereals for human consumption. This is enough to cover the annual calorie need for 1.2 billion people. Under a business-as-usual scenario, by 2050, some 1.5 billion tons of cereal will be used annually for non-food, and at least 1.45 billion tons will be used as animal feed. This is enough to cover the calorie need of 4.35 billion people. And these are not the only environmental impacts of livestock expansion. Overgrazing, in presence of too many livestock, such as goats or cows, strips the soil of its vegetation and exposes it to erosion by wind and water. The world's population of cattle has increased from 720 million in 1950 to about 1.5 billion in 2001, according to the FAO statistics. The number of sheep and goats has expanded from 1 billion in 1950 to 1.75 billion during the same period. This increase in livestock production since 1950 has led to severe overgrazing worldwide, and it's estimated that since 1950 we have lost some 680 million hectares, 20% of global rangeland degraded by overgrazing. Of course, the picture is a complex one, and other factors also should be taken into consideration. Farm animals raised in industrial countries consume more than 5 calories in feedstock for each calorie of meat or dairy food which is produced. In India, the rate is less than 1.5 calories. In Kenya, where animals are not fed grain but live off grass or agricultural byproducts which are not edible by human beings, livestock actually yields more calories than they consume. And it's equally important to acknowledge that livestock rearing represents a source of income for perhaps 1 billion people in the world, representing 1/3 of the poor in the rural areas. We may therefore have to distinguish between different ways of producing meat, between different ways in which meat production and consumption affect global food security, by the emission of greenhouse gases, by overgrazing and the degradation of soils, and finally, by the inefficiency caused by the production of crops for feed instead of for human consumption. These impacts are at different levels, they are caused by different types of meat production, the questions raised are different, and so are the populations concerned, both at the production and at the consumption ends. What is, however, clear to me is that we cannot continue to define quantitative objectives in the production of food, such as, for example, the need to increase meat output by more than 200 million tons to reach 470 million tons by 2050, one objective identified in advance of the FAO World Summit on Food Security, without questioning trends on the demand side of the equation, particularly when epidemiologists constantly warn us of the public health problems resulting from the meatification of diets. Ladies and gentlemen, I warmly welcome the discussion which is being launched today. Human rights, I believe, can only make progress when taboos are broken, when individuals, among the boldest or among the most enlightened, dare to ask questions that most people would prefer not to see raised. I would therefore like to thank very warmly President Buzek and Vice President McMillan-Scott for convening this hearing, and I look forward to working together with the European Parliament on this subject in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. de Schutter.
Labai ačiū, ponė Schutter. Tiems jūsų, kurie nežinote jo gyvenimo prašymo, aš norėčiau pasakyti, kad jis yra ne tik specialusis Jungtinių tautų pranešėjas dėl teisės į maistą, bet ir ES tinklo dėl pagrindinių teisių steigėjas. Taip pat jis yra žmogaus teisų dėstymo universitetuose fondo direktorius. Noriu Jums už tai padėkoti ir tai, ką Jūs šiandien pasakėte, labai aiškiai atspindėjo, kad teisė į maistą yra žmogaus teisė. Ponios ir ponai, dabar trumpa pertraukėlė, tribūnoje pasikeis kalbėtojai ir netrukus pratęsime posėdį. Keletas minučių.
You know, McMillan-Scott will take over now.
I am it. Yes. Thank you very much.
We have you arrived.
I'm a radical moderator.
Gar nicht so viel. Also, vielleicht so zweimal. Gar nicht so ziemlich aufgewachsen. Es gibt ja auch, wenn mein Mann ja Ire ist.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, for the last part of our hearing, I'm joined by two strong advocates of eating less meat. In fact, both are vegetarians. I just don't eat meat. And our first speaker in this session is Dr. Rajendra Pachauri. Anybody who studies the environment, and especially the issue of climate change, knows this legend, who is the chairman of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Dr. Rajendra Pachauri.
Thank you very much for this great privilege. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, members of the media, friends and colleagues. It's really a unique honor for me to be with you on this occasion and to talk about something which I believe is of crucial importance to the future of humanity and the well-being of all species on this planet. I personally believe that the problem of climate change has now reached proportions that we cannot possibly ignore any longer. We're on the eve of the Conference of the Parties due to take place in Copenhagen next week, and we hope that we'll come up with a strong agreement and that all the countries of the world that can make a difference, not only in terms of adaptation to the impacts of climate change, but mitigating emissions within a time frame and at an adequate level that really makes a difference. Now, I believe that quite apart from what governments and what the nation state can do, we as human beings and members of our society can do a great deal in our own individual capacities. Mahatma Gandhi had one very important principle in life. He used to say, be the change that you want to see in the world. And when people asked him what his message was to others around him, he said, my life is my message. And therefore, if we believe that we have to take action to mitigate this growing problem of climate change and the challenge which is going to affect not only our children and grandchildren, but us in our lives, then we have to move on rather quickly. And I want to focus on the fact that livestock production is one sector where we can bring about a major transformation. And I'm not suggesting anything radical, anything that has to be done overnight, but certainly if we embark on a path whereby we reduce the emissions of this particular cycle of livestock production, we can really make a difference. And why should we focus on this sector? Well, 80% of the emissions from agriculture come essentially from livestock production. And the FAO has investigated that about 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions from human activities, if you take a 100-year time horizon, because there are gases in this basket of greenhouse gases which have a very short life in the atmosphere. So therefore, if you take a 100-year time horizon, then 9% of it comes from carbon dioxide. So that's really a small percentage as opposed to carbon dioxide from other activities. 37% is in the form of methane and 65% of oxides of nitrogen. There are huge environmental impacts from this cycle. The livestock sector, according to FAO's report, emerges as one of the top 2 or 3 most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems. It should be a major policy focus when dealing with problems of land degradation, because these are associated with the livestock production cycle, climate change and air pollution. It also leads to water shortage and water pollution and loss of biodiversity. So therefore, the livestock sector is by far the largest anthropogenic user of land. As a matter of fact, livestock production accounts for 70% of all agricultural land and 30% of the world's surface land area. It's also true that in the past few decades there has been an attempt on the part of several countries to expand their production of meat and products from livestock. For instance, 70% of the previous forested land in the Amazon is occupied by cattle pastures, and crops for animal feed cover a large part of the remainder. It wasn't all that long ago, you might remember, that some countries in Latin America, for instance, were suffering from huge foreign exchange crises. And what did they do? They decided to go in for large-scale beef production in response to a growing global demand. And this has led to clearing of several of the forest areas that are now converted into pasture land for cattle and other animals. I must also remind you about the water intensity of this particular sector. Wheat, for instance, 1 kilogram of wheat for production requires about 1,300 liters of water, rice 3,400 liters, poultry 3,900 liters, pork 4,800 liters, beef 15,500 liters. So therefore, in a world which is going to be impacted by climate change, leading to great water stress in several parts of the globe, and just to give you a number, we have projected in the IPCC that in Africa alone, by 2020, we would have 75 to 250 million people living in a state of water stress as a result of climate change. And therefore, if we continue with this intensification of production of meat, then clearly we are going to add to the problem of water scarcity and water stress. And this should be seen in light of the fact that there's a large number of people across the world who are malnourished, who don't get enough food, but much of the food grain that's being produced today is going into production of meat and products of the livestock cycle. If, for instance, that was not to be, then a good proportion of this would perhaps add to food security worldwide, and people would be able to get much better nourishment. 1/3 of the world's cereals harvest and over 90% of soya protein is used to feed animals. Now that's a substantial quantity. And this is essentially going to animals, not humans. Despite the inherent inefficiencies of meat production. And let me also tell you that it takes more than 10 kilograms of animal feed, and this is essentially food grains, to produce 1 kilogram of beef. If you look at the comparison with soy alternatives, a tofu burger is responsible for 10 times less CO2 emissions than a comparable beef meat product. May I also say that there are huge health benefits from lower consumption of meat. And when I talk to audiences all over the world, I emphasize the fact that cutting down on meat consumption will be good for your health and the health of the planet. I am particularly happy that in this very country, several months ago, I gave a talk in the city of Ghent, which happily started a movement to see that 1 day a week becomes a meat-free day. And what I'd like to advocate is what Sir Paul McCARTNEY has been saying for some time now, that we should make 1 day a week a meat-free day. Today, there are 20 billion farm animals and poultry that are going to be raised and fed. That's a huge number. In 2006, farmers produced 250 million tons of meat, 5 times as much as in the 1950s. And I think our fathers and forefathers were pretty strong and healthy individuals. So there is no reason why one should say that meat protein is essential for producing healthy conditions among human beings. As a matter of fact, when I'm confronted with this assertion, I tell them that there are two specialists that I'd like to refer you to who do extremely well with plant diets. And these are a species called elephants and another species called horses. They get all their nutrition from plant-based food. I would like to end by saying that a large number of very distinguished luminaries throughout history have been focused on vegetarian diets. I'll give you a few quotations. Albert Einstein said, "Nothing will benefit human health and increase chances of survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet." And this, incidentally, has now been established through research that has been published in The Lancet, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it. Leo Tolstoy said, "If a man earnestly seeks a righteous life, his first act of abstinence is from animal food." And Sir Paul McCARTNEY, and he's going to say much more, but let me quote him while he's here. "Vegetarianism takes care of so many things in one shot: ecology, famine, cruelty." So may I submit that, particularly from the point of view of mitigating climate change, this is a very simple, effective, and short-term measure that all of us can contribute to implementing in a way that we save future generations from the impacts of climate change. Just one set of final words, if I may say. If we continue on the path that we are on currently and business as usual, the impacts of climate change, in my view, as I spoke in the UN on the 22nd of September with about 100 heads of government, can lead to a disruption of life in social, political, and economic terms in several parts of the world. My own assessment is that there's a danger of about a dozen countries becoming failed states. And if that were to happen, then clearly it has implications for every section of human society, because failed states are where you get exports of illegal drugs, illegal weapons, terrorism, and illegal immigrants. And I think, therefore, we must realize we are all residents of spaceship Earth, and if we want to protect the climate of this Earth and stabilize temperature increase to, say, 2 degrees Celsius or less, then I think we have to use every means to mitigate the emissions of greenhouse gases. And I'd submit to you once again that cutting down on meat consumption would be an extremely effective way of doing so. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Rajendra, very much indeed, and for all you do. I said that Rajendra Pachauri was a legend. Sir Paul McCartney is more than a legend. He's a superstar. And he's breaking his European tour. He was in Hamburg last night playing, and he's going back to Berlin tonight. I'm immensely grateful to him, not only for being here, but for giving his time and his energy to a cause in which he strongly believes, and so do I. And that is that we can all make an individual contribution to reducing global warming by eating less meat. Paul was the sole author of the world's most popular song, Yesterday. Today, he's talking about tomorrow, your tomorrow and your children's tomorrow. Sir Paul McCartney, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I am talking on behalf of the campaign that we've started in the UK called Meat Free Monday. How I first of all got involved with this campaign was after reading a story about the UN report that was issued in 2006. It was called Livestock's Long Shadow. And what interested me in this was that it was not written by vegetarians. I think if it had been written by vegetarians, then people would have just said, well, you would say that, and I can understand that. But to me, obviously, the people in the UN who wrote this were probably traditional eaters and probably ate meat themselves. So that's what attracted me to it. So I started then writing some letters to heads of governments saying just that. You know, you're going to think it's me, a vegetarian, just banging on about my favorite subject. In actual fact, I pointed out that this was not written by me and that these facts had been obtained by the UN. So since then, many more studies and reports have appeared, New York Times and more recently the London Times, the front page, on this subject. So I personally think there is an urgent need to do something about it. So why is there a need? Basically, as Dr. Pachauri pointed out, livestock industry produces more greenhouse gases than all of transport put together. Cars, planes, trains, trucking. And they used to be who we thought were the villains of the piece. But it would appear from these figures that the livestock industry produces more. So this goes into areas like deforestation. They say that 6 football pitches disappear every minute in deforestation for grazing or for growing animal feed. Water. To produce one burger requires the amount of water used in a 4-hour shower. So these are very interesting facts, and I would be quite glad if these weren't true, because we could just carry on as we are forever, quite happily, and not bother with this whole subject. But I've got a nasty feeling this is true, so that's why I'm here today. Livestock accounts for 8% of global water use, and livestock rearing is one of the largest sources of water pollution. This is animal waste, antibiotics, hormones, chemicals from tanneries and places like that, fertilizers and pesticides for feed crops. The animal feed itself has a high carbon footprint in the transportation and the land use. Apparently, 1/3 of cereal crops grown are grown to feed animals, and 90% of soya grown is to feed animals. It takes 40 calories of fossil fuel to produce 1 calorie of feedlot beef. Apparently, it takes 2.2 calories to produce 1 calorie of plant-based protein. Then we get on to the emissions from cattle. Because of the way cows' stomachs work, we all know that they regurgitate. This causes belching, and therefore they produce methane. I know you've probably heard all these facts, but I think it's worth just going over it again. The methane, molecule for molecule, has 21 times more heat-trapping power than CO2. And it stays in the atmosphere 9 to 15 years. So that's a lot of methane. And those facts are Science World 2002. Also, the livestock industry produces a lot of nitrous oxide, and which is 310 times more powerful and stays in the atmosphere 114 years. So the gases that are released today will be degrading the climate decades from now. So what to do? Well, I think people are very confused about what they can do. People want to do their bit. They want to make a meaningful difference, but they don't necessarily know what to do. So our campaign says, try 1 meat-free day in the week. It's actually not that hard to do. It's kind of interesting when you get into it. So we suggest a meat-free Monday, but of course it could be any day. I think the point about this that attracts me to this idea is it is very doable. If you say to people, go vegetarian, that's very hard for most people to do. You've got to have a passion and you've got to care enough to do that. But I think if you suggest to people one day, you know, most people have kind of had a bit of a blowout over the weekend, and Monday they go to the gym. So I'm suggesting they could also cut out meat on that day. It might be a good day to do it. So once, for instance, we didn't recycle. We weren't interested, but now it's an accepted part of our lifestyle. Hybrid cars didn't appeal to people, but now they're very popular. And so I think what we need to do is give people an answer. So I'm suggesting that one day meat-free could cut individuals' emissions by equivalent of a 1,000-mile car trip. The nice thing for me is that this is happening now. We've had examples of Ghent having its own meat-free day. In the United States, Baltimore has a school system that involves 80,000 kids in a meat-free day. In Sweden now, they've started to label food to show the customers the environmental damage rating. So it's giving the people a choice. You're told that, you know, this burger is going to damage the atmosphere to the equivalent of this. And so at least the customers then can look at the goods and say, well, maybe I don't want to buy that. So it gives them the chance to buy sensibly and responsibly. In Sao Paulo, in Brazil, Brazil being, of course, a huge meat exporter, they even have a meat-free day. And in the UK, there are quite a few schools now that are into this campaign. And a headmistress I talked to suggested that she was a little worried that the parents might think she was politicizing the issue for the children, but she hasn't had any feedback to that effect. In fact, they're very happy about this because everyone wants to do their bit. The kids love it because it's their future. You know, we always assume that because kids are young, they're stupid. They're not. We know they're not. They understand this is their planet. They're going to inherit this planet. And if we leave it in a mess, they're going to have to clean it up. So the kids involved in these programs understand that. And they embrace the idea. It is their planet. And as parents, we all try and do the best for our children in so many ways. In this way, we've got to look at responsibility for the future. We've got to be responsible for our children's future. We owe them that much. And as Dr. PACHAURI mentioned, health is the other aspect. The World Cancer Research Fund has called for reduction in red meat. So this is going to the source of children's and adults' health. So what can the European Parliament do, and the governments of the world? I suggest that they could encourage and guide people to reduce meat consumption, because now new ethical issues have arisen, and it's not really very ethical to ignore these issues. It's no longer a personal choice. This is something that's going to affect the whole of the planet. So we have to think of it in that way. But when a crisis arises or arose in the past, parliaments and people deal with it. So it can be done. For instance, if you think of in London many, many years ago, or in LA, in London in my case, when I was growing up, the newspapers every winter had a picture of the London smog and smoke and its fog, and they called it pea soupers. And it didn't seem like anything to worry about. It was just, oh, yeah, you know, you can't see your hand in front of your face. So we knew about that. But once the death rates rose, and once everyone realized the health hazards, something was done about cleaning it up. And now you go to London, it's a clean city. That's an example of something having to be done that was done. For instance, public smoking. I grew up in a room full of smoke. every family party was just everyone smoked. And I didn't think anything of it. Both my parents smoked and my mother died of cancer. I didn't think anything of the smoking issue at all. I smoked myself for quite a long time. But once medical opinion associated with all sorts of diseases and passive smoking became known about, we had to do something about it. Governments had to do something about it. And now we accept that nobody's going to be allowed to smoke in this chamber. You've got to go outside. But we accept it. It was a huge change, and it wasn't popular, but if something had to occur, so for the future of the planet. So I think, therefore, the governments and the Parliament in this case can encourage and inform and help people to see how easy it would be to be free of meat for one day. Another aspect of what to do is to help farmers, because this issue comes up all the time, that if less livestock is produced, this is going to hit the farmers. But again, I say that the governments and the Parliament have got to help the farmers to adapt to new practices. This has happened all throughout history. We've had to change how we do things. And I think now is a vital need to make another change. You have to explain to farmers what they can grow, how they can still achieve the same levels of productivity, but it's got to be in different ways. We've got to adapt. I myself live on an organic farm, and when years ago we decided to go organic, all the farmers around me said, well, it's stupid, you know, it's no good, it's not going to work. And now they don't say that. They agree because they're finding a good price for organic food, and so many of them are changing. And I think that's the secret. So what I'm here today to suggest is that the first step is a meat-free Monday or a meat-free day, which allows people to get into this idea simply. It's also not a new idea. This kind of thing has occurred in the past. President Truman in 1947, in his first televised address to the American people, talked about the crisis in Europe and how the American people were going to have to help people after the war, and they needed to provide aid in the form of food. He suggested in 1947 that they should not eat meat on a Tuesday, and he went further. He suggested that on Thursday they should not eat poultry and eggs. And this was something that actually happened. You know, we forget that this has been done in history. I think we also have to look at world poverty, where you've got 1.4 billion people in extreme poverty. So this has become an urgent social issue. And one of the best things we can do, I believe, is to just reduce meat consumption. I talked to Al Gore about this, well known for his views on global warming, and I asked him if he would be prepared to give me a statement that I could read out today, and he very kindly gave me that. He says, among the causes of the climate crisis is the growing meat intensity of diets around the world, particularly when the livestock are raised on ecologically harmful factory farms that take animals out of pastures, interrupt the natural synergy between plants and animals, require 6,000 gallons of water on average for each pound of protein, and produce large amounts of overly acidic animal waste that cannot be used as fertilizer and must be treated as toxic waste instead, creating threats to the quality of the water and air in the areas where they're located. Though I am not a vegetarian, Al says, I accept the medical evidence that the growing amount of red meat consumed around the world is also associated with the increasing rates of diseases of the heart and arteries. For all these reasons, initiatives designed to reduce this global dietary trend, like Meatless Mondays, represent a responsible and welcome component of a comprehensive strategy for reducing global warming pollution and simultaneously improving human health. So, In summing up, I urge you, each of you, to do your bit for your people, for their children, and for the planet they will inherit. Go meat free one day. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul, very much indeed. Whether you agree or disagree, our intention today has been to focus attention on the issue of livestock production, the consumption of meat, its impact on health, and, of course, on the environment. And Sir Paul, Rajendra and I have signed a joint statement as a concluding statement to this hearing, and I'll just read it very quickly to you. We're grateful to the European Parliament for holding this hearing. We note that, with the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, the European Parliament gained joint responsibility with EU governments over promoting measures at an international level to deal with regional or worldwide environmental problems, and in particular combating climate change. So we three urge MEPs to respond to the expert opinions expressed here and encourage them to show a lead by consuming less meat. We call on these governments, and all represented at Copenhagen and in subsequent discussions, to adjust their agriculture, development, environment and public health policies to reflect the role of livestock production in climate change. We call on the local authorities and municipalities in Europe and worldwide to adopt the principle of a meat-free day for their employees. And we call on people worldwide, but especially in the developed nations, to change their diet to one meat-free day as the most effective way to combat global warming. Now, colleagues, friends, we've made special arrangements for your catering today. Half of all dishes served in the Parliament on this day will be meat-free. So that's a start. So I'd like to thank you for being here, those who are watching on television, the speakers who contributed this morning, the staff who've organised this, including the catering staff, but in particular the last two speakers, Dr. Rajendra K and Sir Paul McCartney. Thank you very much indeed.